The stars had always seemed distant, cold, unreachable. But now, they were just another reminder of how far humanity had fallen. Captain Rhys Locke stood at the edge of Earth's last bastion, gazing out through the thick glass of the observation deck. His mind was elsewhere, caught in a place between past regrets and the dark promise of the future. Earth, what was left of it, was a decaying relic of a once great civilization. The planet's cities lay in ruins after centuries of conflict, first with the alien Zerath Empire, then the unrelenting machine forces of the sentient collective. Humanity, no longer the dominant force in the galaxy, had been pushed to the outer fringes of the known universe. Earth was a sanctuary now, protected by a fleet that was barely holding together. But Locke was not thinking about Earth's fate. Not yet, at least. His mind was locked on the message that had come through the deep space channels, an encrypted signal from somewhere out in the black, an alien race's desperate cry for help. A cold, metallic voice interrupted his thoughts. "Captain, we've analyzed the transmission. It's genuine." Dr. Ilara Moreau's voice crackled through the comm link. The scientist and former diplomat was as deeply invested in this mission as he was, but for different reasons. She believed in diplomacy. Locke had learned to believe in action. "Humanity's last chance," Locke muttered to himself. Moreau's voice came through, warm despite the urgency in her words. "You don't seem thrilled by the prospect, Rhys. This could be the break. We need to get Earth back on its feet. They're asking for our help." Locke turned away from the view of Earth's ruined surface and focused on the terminal that flickered before him. The transmission had come from a long-lost alien species known as the Arkans. They were an advanced race, wise in the ways of the cosmos, but their civilization had been shattered. According to the data they transmitted, their annihilation was imminent, at the hands of a being the Arkans had called the Voidborn. "We've got nothing to offer them," Locke replied, the bitterness in his voice sharper than he intended. He knew that Earth's fleet, the last remnants of humanity's military might, was only a shadow of its former glory. There wasn't enough left to help anyone, yet here they were, offering themselves as a solution to something far worse than anything they'd faced before. But Moreau persisted, her voice calm but forceful. "The Voidborn is no ordinary enemy. We're talking about a godlike entity. It devours entire star systems. The Arkans are willing to give us the key to stopping it. If we don't act now, the galaxy, our home, will be nothing but a memory." Locke ran his hand through his hair, pacing back and forth. "And you believe them? Do we have any other choice?" It was a fair point. Humanity had been running out of choices for decades. The wars, the betrayals, the endless fights for survival had taken their toll. And now, a galaxy-spanning force of cosmic destruction was coming for them. Coming for everyone. Locke glanced down at the mission brief Moreau had sent. The Voidborn wasn't a name from any textbook. It was an ancient, terrifying being from the outer depths of the universe, older than any known civilization. A god that had been left untouched until now, but this time its hunger was turning toward Earth. Locke closed his eyes, the weight of command pressing against his chest. He knew what this meant. No matter the outcome, humanity was going to be at the heart of the storm. There was no escaping the Voidborn's wrath. "Set course for the Arcon system," Locke finally ordered. "Prepare the fleet." As Locke prepared for departure, Dr. Moreau worked in the command center with her team, adjusting course parameters and fine-tuning the analysis of the Arcon distress signal. Moreau, once a respected diplomat in humanity's golden years, had seen what the universe could offer, a sense of hope, a sense of unity between species. But now, there was no hope. There was only survival. And yet, she believed that humanity, despite all its flaws, had something to offer the galaxy. She wasn't sure what that something was, but she hoped they'd find it in the Arcon system. It had to be worth something. The bridge was quiet, except for the hum of the ancient engines straining to pull them through the cold blackness of space. The only sound was the occasional beep of systems coming online, the low murmur of officers prepping for battle. Locke leaned against the wall near the observation window, watching the stars blur into streaks as the ship's FTL engines roared to life. A voice broke the silence, and the sharp crackle of Hera's voice filled the air. "Captain Locke, I've run simulations based on the Arcon data. The Voidborn's energy output is beyond anything we've encountered before. The weapon, they claim, will stop it. It's theoretical at best." Hera had been humanity's last hope when their AI network was obliterated during the war with the sentient collective. But this AI was different. Hera was not just a military tool, it was a remnant of a time when humanity had mastered technology, when artificial intelligence wasn't just a tool, but a partner in navigating the stars. "I don't need theories, Hera," Locke responded, turning toward the AI's projection on the bridge's holographic screen. "I need a plan. I am working on it, Captain, but we must proceed with caution. This entity is not like anything we've encountered. If the Arkon's weapon doesn't work, we will need another solution." Locke's fingers drummed against the console. His mind was racing. Another solution, more problems, more sacrifices. But the one thing that had kept him alive this long was his resolve. He wasn't going to let Earth fall into the Voidborn's grasp. Not after everything they'd lost. "We'll figure it out," he said. "We don't have a choice." Moreau approached him, her face lined with the exhaustion of too many years spent navigating the mess of alien politics and galactic diplomacy. Yet her eyes shone with that glimmer of hope that, somehow, they could make a difference. "What do you think? Are we ready for what's coming?" Locke turned to her. He'd been the one who had led them through the worst battles humanity had ever fought. But the upcoming war with the Voidborn was unlike any other. "No, but ready or not, we're about to face something that could change everything. And that's the least of it." With that, the final preparations were made. The ship lurched, and the crew braced themselves for the unknown. In the quiet before the storm, a sense of inevitability settled over them. Humanity's last defenders were about to make their stand, not just for Earth, but for the very survival of the galaxy. The stars outside seemed just a little closer. Too close, maybe. The Arcon system loomed ahead, its distant stars barely visible through the endless stretch of black. The ship's engines hummed with quiet power as it pushed toward the unknown. Rhys Locke stood at the front of the bridge, his eyes locked on the navigation readouts, his fingers tapping against the railing. He was ready for whatever came next. At least, that's what he told himself. Dr. Alara Moreau was seated at the strategy console, poring over the data from the Arcon signal. The more she analyzed it, the more unsettled she felt. She had been a negotiator once, a diplomat who spent her days in councils and peace talks. She had seen the best and worst of alien cultures. But the Arcon message wasn't about diplomacy. It was desperation, a cry for help. And desperation made people do strange things. "Captain," she called, turning toward Locke. "I'm getting a secondary signal from the Arkhan homeworld. It's odd." Locke walked over, his boots clicking on the metal floor. "Odd how?" The distress message was a standard protocol, yes, but this is different. There's something more here, something hidden. They're trying to tell us something without saying it directly. Locke narrowed his eyes. "Meaning?" Moreau hesitated. "It's encrypted. It could be a warning or a trap, but they're not making it clear. Whatever's happening on their end, it's not simple." Locke's jaw tightened. "We don't have time for this. We need answers." Moreau nodded, working her fingers across the console's interface. "I'm trying to unlock the remaining codes. If there's a deeper message, we'll find it." Meanwhile, Captain Locke's thoughts were elsewhere. The Voidborn. He had heard of it only in hushed tones, in myths passed down by survivors of the galaxy's ancient wars. But now it was real, the being that consumed entire star systems. It was no longer a myth. It was coming for them. His mind flashed to Earth, the charred remains of what was once humanity's cradle. Would they be able to stop it? Could anyone? Suddenly, the console chimed with urgency. Moreau looked up, her face pale. "The signal's clear. The Arcon system has been wiped out, everything, their planets, their fleet, gone." The Voidborn is here. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Locke felt a surge of dread. He turned to the crew whose tense faces mirrored his own. Prepare for immediate descent. We're going to the Arcon homeworld. The journey to the Arcon system felt like an eternity. The ship slid through the void, the distant stars flickering, like dying embers in the deep night. Tension built as the crew prepared themselves for whatever awaited them on the surface of the Arcon's dying world. It was a barren landscape when they finally arrived, orbiting the scorched remains of the Arcon homeworld. The planet was a pale shadow of what it once was, a ghost of a civilization that had fallen to the Voidborn. The surface was cracked, the oceans evaporated, and cities lay in ruin, scorched by heat that could only come from something immense, something ancient. Locke's gaze hardened. Get me a visual on the surface now. The main viewport shifted, showing the broken expanse of the planet below. A deep scar ran across the land like a wound, stretching from the northern pole to the equator. There was no sign of life, no movement, no ships, no survivors. The Arcon's once proud cityscapes were now ash. We're not alone, Hera's voice interrupted, calm and calculating as always. There's something down there. It's unnatural. Locke stepped toward the console, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean? I'm detecting an energy reading, Hera continued, but it doesn't match any known signatures. Before Hera could finish, the ship's systems began to overload, alarms blaring across the bridge. Shut it down, Locke barked, and the crew scrambled to find the source of the malfunction. But it was too late. In an instant, the ship shuddered violently as the sky above the planet seemed to twist and ripple. A deep hum filled the air, a sound so alien it sent chills down the spine of every crew member. The Voidborn had arrived, not just in proximity, but here, in the very atmosphere of the Arcon world. Locke gritted his teeth. Shields up. All hands to battle stations. The ship's hull groaned under the sudden strain, as though the very fabric of space itself was warping around them. The Voidborn wasn't a simple force of nature. It was a being of unimaginable power, a presence that bent reality itself. Moreau looked up from her station, her expression stricken. Captain, it's everywhere, the energy signatures. It's not a ship. It's not an entity we can understand. The words died in her throat as the image of the planet shifted. The ground trembled and a colossal, shadowy figure began to rise from the deep scar that cut across the Arcon world. It was enormous, impossibly vast, a form that stretched far beyond the horizon, twisting in and out of space like a creature caught between worlds. Its body pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly glow, and a massive, infinite maw opened in the center of its form, as if the universe itself was about to be consumed. We've got to get out of here, Locke shouted, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Full reverse now, but the ship was locked in place. The Voidborn's presence was pulling at their systems, warping space and time around them. They were trapped. Captain, we're receiving a transmission, Moreau called, out, from the Arcon fleet. Locke's eyes widened. There were no Arcon ships left. The fleet had been destroyed, the remnants scattered across the cosmos. But this transmission was different. Put it through, he ordered, though he already knew it was too late. Whatever message the Arcon had left, it wouldn't be one of survival. The screen flickered to life, showing an image of a small Arcon ship, floating aimlessly in the dead silence of space. Its hull was scorched, battered, and broken. A lone figure appeared on the screen, an Arcon survivor. His voice was strained, raspy, and desperate. They were waiting for us, the Arcon said, his eyes wide with terror. The Voidborn, it is not a force, it is a god born from the universe's oldest sins. We tried to contain it. We tried to stop it, but the transmission cut out, leaving only static behind. Locke's mind raced. A god. The Voidborn was not just a destroyer, it was something more, something far worse. The Arcon's last warning echoed in his mind. It is not a force, it is a god. We need to act, Moreau said, her voice steady despite the growing panic. We're running out of time. Locke nodded grimly. We don't have a choice. This is it. As the Voidborn loomed closer, Locke's eyes hardened with determination. Humanity had faced the impossible before, and this time would be no different. They would find a way to stop it, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The countdown had begun. The dark expanse of space stretched beyond the shattered remnants of the Arkhan homeworld, a cold and silent witness to the terror unfolding within. The Voidborn was not just a force of destruction. It was a presence, a dark storm that bent the laws of physics itself. As the massive, godlike entity grew larger in the viewport, the crew of humanity's last fleet began to feel the weight of its incomprehensible power. The Exodus, the flagship of humanity's fleet, rocked violently once more as the ship's energy shields flickered and strained under the pressure. The pulse of the Voidborn was relentless, a force that tugged at the very fabric of their reality. Every sensor readout on the bridge showed a rising spike in energy, a feedback loop of destruction that felt like a living thing gnawing at them from every angle. Shields are at 20%, Captain. Hera's calm voice sounded almost out of place amidst the chaos. If we don't break free from this gravitational anomaly, we'll be torn apart. Locke stood at the helm, gripping the console with white knuckles, his face drawn tight with focus. His eyes never wavered from the swirling mass of dark energy ahead. The crew was scrambling trying to regain control of the ship, trying to fight against the inevitable pull of the Voidborn's grip. We can't fight it head-on. Not with these odds, Locke said, more to himself than to anyone else. The thought of retreat was almost unbearable. But this was not a battle that could be won with weapons or strength alone. We don't have the luxury of retreat, Captain, Moreau replied, her voice steady but filled with anxiety. She stood beside him, her hand hovering over a console that showed the damage to the fleet's surrounding ships. They were in worse shape than the Exodus, struggling just to maintain basic functions, their crew exhausted from days of trying to outrun the Voidborn's presence. How long can we keep the shields up? Locke demanded, his voice laced with urgency. Moreau didn't flinch. Not long. The anomaly is too powerful. We need a way to disrupt it. We need to... Her words were cut off as another shockwave hit the ship, causing the lights to flicker. The Exodus shuddered under the impact, and a low, ominous hum filled the bridge. A surge of energy erupted from the Voidborn's mass, flooding their sensors with incomprehensible data. Locke's heart raced. This wasn't just a cosmic event. This wasn't something they could just outmaneuver. Moreau's eyes widened as she scrolled through the data. Captain, I'm detecting intelligence. It's aware of us. It knows we're here. Locke's blood ran cold. How? It's not just attacking us, it's studying us. I think... Moreau's voice trailed off, as though she couldn't quite grasp the implications. It's learning. Locke's thoughts churned as the information sunk in. The Voidborn wasn't just some mindless force of destruction. It was conscious, intelligent, and it was adapting to their every move. Humanity had no hope of winning this fight in the conventional sense, and that realization hit him harder than anything he had faced before. Hera's voice cut through his thoughts. Captain, I've calculated the trajectory. If we don't break free from this anomaly soon, we'll be sucked into its core. I estimate a 73% chance of total destruction within the next 6 hours. Moreau exchanged a quick glance with Locke. The numbers didn't lie. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they had no way of fighting back. No way to stop the Voidborn. What do you suggest? Locke asked, his voice strained with frustration. I've been running some simulations, Hera replied. There's a chance we could destabilize its energy field, but it requires us to get much closer. Closer than any of our ships are capable of handling. Locke clenched his fists. We don't have a choice. We'll take the Exodus in. We'll make it work. Moreau stepped forward, her voice firm. It's not just about getting closer, Rhys. If we destabilize the energy field, we might trigger an explosion that could take the entire fleet with it. You're asking us to sacrifice everything. Locke turned to face her, his eyes hardening. If we don't take that risk, then we'll have nothing left to fight for. Do you really want to watch the galaxy burn? The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled over them. Moreau's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a moment, Locke saw the hesitation in her eyes, the same hesitation he felt within himself. But there was no other way. We'll find a way, Locke finally said, turning back to the view of the Voidborn. We have to. The Exodus hurtled toward the Voidborn, its engines pushed to their limits as the crew worked furiously to maintain control. The ship groaned under the stress of the unpredictable gravitational forces warping space around them. The hull creaked, a reminder of how close they were to the edge of oblivion. Locke stood at the helm, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the eyes of the crew on him, the weight of their trust and fear bearing down on his shoulders. Moreau was at his side, her expression unreadable, but he knew what she was thinking. Was this the end? Or was this their last hope? Steady, Hera, Locke commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. Give me a direct line to the fleet. Aye, Captain, Hera replied. A moment later, the faces of his fleet commanders appeared on the screen, their expressions grim. This is it, Locke said, his tone resolute. We're going in. We have one shot at this. We're going to destabilize the Voidborn's energy field. If we fail together. The commanders nodded in unison, their expressions hardening. They knew what the stakes were. It was not just their survival on the line, it was the survival of everything humanity had fought for. Good luck, Captain, one of them said. Locke took a deep breath. Luck is irrelevant now. We fight or we die. With that, the Exodus hurtled into the heart of the Voidborn's energy field, and the crew braced for impact. The closer they got, the more disorienting the Voidborn became. Time and space warped in ways that defied logic. The stars around them bent and stretched like ribbons, the fabric of the universe itself twisting and breaking apart. The very air in the command deck seemed to distort, thick with a weight that made it hard to breathe. This is it, Moreau whispered, her eyes wide as she watched the energy field grow larger and more unstable. If this doesn't work, it has to work, Locke said, his voice unwavering despite the chaos around them. All hands, brace for impact. The ship rocked violently as they entered the heart of the Voidborn's gravitational anomaly. The hull strained under the pressure, systems flickering and failing as they pushed closer to the center. The Voidborn's presence was all-encompassing now, a dark, suffocating force that seemed to close in from all directions. We're within range, Hera said, initiating destabilization sequence. Moreau grabbed onto the console, her knuckles white with the effort. We need more time. The energy readings are spiking exponentially. Locke's eyes flicked to the readout. They were running out of time. The Voidborn was no longer just a passive force. It was fighting back, actively countering their every move. Set it to maximum, Locke ordered. No more hesitation. In that moment, as the Exodus hurtled toward the core of the Voidborn, Locke felt the weight of everything. The lives of his crew, the fate of humanity, all hanging on the thread of one final gamble. This was it, the last stand. And whether they won or lost, there was no turning back now. The Exodus shuddered violently as it tore through the heart of the Voidborn's gravitational field, the hull groaning under the unimaginable strain. The stars around them twisted like liquid in a cosmic whirlpool, bending the very fabric of space and time. The ship's systems were failing, shields flickering, life support on the verge of collapsing. But the crew held on, steeling themselves, for the final push. Locke gripped the edge of the command chair, sweat trickling down his forehead, his breath shallow. His mind was razor sharp, every decision he'd made in the last few hours coming to a head now. There was no turning back. Initiating destabilization sequence, Hera's voice echoed through the chaos, her calmness a stark contrast to the madness unfolding around them. Warning, energy levels exceeding safe limits, power core instability at critical levels. Do it anyway, Locke rasped, his voice strained but firm. Moreau, standing beside him, couldn't tear her eyes from the viewport. The Voidborn's form had grown exponentially, an incomprehensible mass that stretched beyond their visual field. It was no longer just a presence. It was a force, a god that bent the universe itself to its will. "There's no way we can hold out for long, Rhys," Moreau murmured. "If this destabilizer works, it could take us down with it." Locke's jaw tightened. "We either die here, or we give humanity a fighting chance. You know the stakes." Moreau met his gaze, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the weight of their situation seemed to hit her all over again. And Locke knew the truth. This was not just a battle against the Voidborn, but a battle for their own souls. Could they really do this? Could they push the button that would either save them all and or destroy them forever? "We're almost there," Moreau said, her voice barely a whisper as she worked feverishly at her console. In the corner of his vision, Locke saw Hera's readout flash. The Voidborn had noticed them. Noticed him. Its presence seemed to pulse as if reacting to their approach, sending waves of distortion through the very atmosphere of space. The Voidborn was intelligent, aware of their movements, anticipating their actions. Locke's breath hitched. It was a trap. They had been lured in. Moreau's voice cracked through his thoughts. "Captain, it's shifting. It's adapting faster than we can react." Locke's heart sank as the ship lurched violently. Another massive wave of gravitational force slamming into the Exodus. The ship's systems started to stutter, flickering lights and alarms filling the command deck. The energy shields were almost gone, and the hull integrity was rapidly failing. Moreau's fingers flew over the console, her eyes wide with panic. "The destabilizer's failing. We're not going to make it." But Locke wasn't listening to her anymore. His mind had already gone past the point of no return. The Voidborn was adapting, but they had one final card to play, the last piece of humanity's ingenuity. "Push the destabilizer to full power," Locke ordered. "Override all safety protocols. We need to destabilize that thing now." Urgency in his voice cut through the panic in Moreau's eyes, and she nodded, working faster than ever. The ship shuddered again, the stars outside a swirling storm of impossible geometries. The Voidborn's mass loomed closer, and now they could feel its presence inside the ship, pressing against them, whispering in the back of their minds, trying to break them. Locke could feel it too. The Voidborn wasn't just attacking them physically, it was attacking their wills. It was trying to make them give up, to succumb to despair, but they wouldn't. Not yet. Power surge detected. Hera's voice broke through, calm, in the face of impending chaos. "Core instability. Warning." "Do it," Locke shouted, not caring for the warnings anymore. This was the moment. There was no going back. As Moreau pressed the final sequence, there was a moment of stillness. A brief, breathtaking silence in the midst of chaos, and then the ship's entire frame vibrated with a force so intense that it rattled every bone in Locke's body. The destabilizer, pushed beyond its limits, flared to life, emitting a blinding, pulsating energy wave that spread outward, directly, into the Voidborn. The massive entity seemed to shudder as though it had felt a cut deep within its very core. The Voidborn's form flickered. An impossibility like reality itself was bending and stretching, tearing under the pressure of humanity's final weapon. The energy wave from the Exodus clashed with the Voidborn's gravitational pull, sending out shockwaves of pure energy that tore apart the fabric of the universe itself. Locke felt his breath leave his lungs as the Exodus bucked and twisted in space, its engines screaming in protest. The bridge lights flickered and then went out entirely, leaving them in pitch-black silence. For a moment, there was nothing but the deep hum of the ship's failing systems. Then, Hera's voice, faint, distorted, but still there, cut through the silence. "Energy levels stabilizing," she said, as though speaking from a great distance. "The Voidborn is reacting. It is..." Before she could finish, the ship lurched again, this time with a final sickening twist. The Voidborn's mass was shattering, collapsing inward like a black hole imploding on itself. The universe around them seemed to shrink, and Locke felt the overwhelming pressure of the Voidborn's mind trying to crush his own. It was like trying to hold a star in your hands, but then just as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. The pressure eased and the terrifying presence of the Voidborn flickered and died, dissipating into nothingness. Moreau stood frozen at her, console, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. Did we do it? Locke swallowed hard, his own mind still reeling. They had done it. But at what cost? The Exodus was barely holding together now. Sparks flew from the console and the entire bridge shuddered under the strain. The crew was battered, exhausted, and no one knew how much longer they could last. Status report, Locke barked, forcing himself to focus despite the overwhelming fatigue. We're still alive, Moreau said slowly as though testing the words. The destabilizer worked. The Voidborn is gone. But Locke didn't feel relief. Not yet. His gaze swept the bridge, landing on each crew member, who were staring at him in silent awe and fear. They had faced the impossible, and somehow, against all odds, they had won. But the price had been high. The Voidborn was gone. But they had no way of knowing what else they had unleashed. Hira's voice broke through again, but this time it was not with good news. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the fleet. It's a distress signal. It's from Earth. Locke felt a cold chill seep into his bones. The last time they had heard from Earth, it had been nothing more than a graveyard, a dead world that had fallen to the Voidborn's influence. Patch it through, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The transmission flickered to life and Locke's heart sank as the image on the screen resolved into a familiar, haunting face. General Marie Kessler, the leader of the human resistance. We've lost contact with the remaining colonies, Captain, she said, her voice strained, heavy with the weight of loss. The Voidborn's destruction, it's left a rift, a wound in the fabric of the galaxy. We don't know what's coming next, but we've seen strange things on the horizon. This is just the beginning. Locke's blood turned to ice as Kessler's words sank in. The battle was far from over. The universe they had fought to save was on the brink of something far worse. And now the real fight for humanity's future was only just beginning. The Exodus drifted silently through the black void, its once glorious hull now scarred and fractured, a hollow shell of its former self. The crew had weathered the storm, the worst of it at least. But the lingering silence felt like a suffocating weight pressing down on every soul aboard. Locke sat in the captain's chair, his hands resting on the armrests, fingers twitching, with the remnants of adrenaline. His eyes were heavy, his body numb from the exhaustion of the last several days. His thoughts were a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. Relief, grief, uncertainty. It was as though the battle had cost him more than just physical energy. It had cost something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. The ship's atmosphere felt cold now, like the life had been drained from it. The crew had won, survived, but the universe was not the same as it had been before. Nothing could ever return to normal, and that was the hardest truth to face. Moreau entered the bridge, her face pale, but determined. She'd always been a fighter, but even she looked broken now, cracked by the enormity of what they had just endured. We've got a full damage report, Captain, she said, her voice low. It's bad. The hull's compromised beyond repairs and most of the systems are offline, but we're alive. We're still here. Locke's lips twitched, a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Barely. We did what we had to do, Moreau said, her voice tinged with bitterness. But at what cost? I don't know, Locke admitted. I don't know how much longer we can keep this ship running. Hell, I don't even know how long we can keep us running. He stood, stretching stiffly, his joints aching from the prolonged tension. He walked toward the viewport, staring out into the abyss. The stars looked the same as always, yet the universe felt different now, as if they had crossed some unseen threshold and could never return to the way things had been. Do you think it's over? Moreau asked quietly, coming to stand beside him. Locke didn't answer immediately. He wanted to. He wanted to believe that the worst was behind them, that humanity had triumphed and would rebuild. But the look in General Kessler's eyes haunted him still, the warning about what lay ahead, and the rift, the one they'd caused by defeating the Voidborn. It wasn't something they could ignore. "I don't know," he finally said, "but I do know one thing. We've made it this far. And as long as we're breathing, we're not giving up." Moreau met his gaze, her expression softening just a little. "You really believe that?" "I have to," he replied, the weight of his words heavy in the silence that followed. "We all do." The Exodus limped toward the nearest human colony, a small outpost on the edge of known space. It was a barren, desolate place, but it was a beacon of hope nonetheless. The crew worked tirelessly to stabilize the ship, knowing they couldn't afford to stay idle for long. There were supplies to gather, messages to send, decisions to make. The galaxy was broken, and they were the only ones who could fix it. Moreau had taken to working with the engineers, trying to salvage what she could from the wreckage. Locke, meanwhile, spent hours reviewing the data from their encounter with the Voidborn, the anomalies it had left in its wake. Something was changing in the universe. It was subtle at first, a ripple in the fabric of reality, but it was there. It would only grow with time. The rest of the crew had mostly gone silent too, each of them processing the horrors they'd witnessed in their own ways. There were no celebrations, no triumphant speeches. The cost of victory was too high, and the uncertainty of the future loomed over them like a dark cloud. On the bridge, Locke and Moreau stood in front of the communications console, their eyes fixed on the signal coming from Earth. The transmission was weak, distorted by the damage the Voidborn had caused, but it was clear enough. General Kessler's voice, harsh and gritty, filled the room. "Locke," she said, her tone unreadable. "We've sent out a fleet to meet you. The rift the Voidborn created. It's not just a void. Something's coming through it. We don't know what yet, but it's big. It's coming for us." The words hit Locke like a punch to the gut. The Voidborn was gone, but the aftermath of its destruction was far worse than anything they'd imagined. Moreau looked at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We thought we stopped it. We thought we destroyed the threat." "We stopped the Voidborn," Locke said, his voice low, barely a whisper. "But we've opened a door to something worse." Kessler's voice crackled again, her tone edged with fear. "The rest of the fleet is gathering. We don't have much time. Whatever's coming, it's beyond anything we've ever faced, and we need your help." Locke's heart pounded in his chest. The burden of leadership was crushing. The weight of responsibility was always heavier after a victory, a reminder that it wasn't the end of the war, but a new beginning. But even as he felt the crushing reality of the unknown pressing in on him, he knew one thing: humanity wasn't done fighting. Moreau stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Rhys," she said softly, "you can do this. We can do this." Locke nodded slowly, looking out at the stars once more. They had been to hell and back, and now they were facing something even darker. But they had survived the impossible before. They would do it again. "We'll take the fleet," Locke said, his voice growing stronger. "We'll make sure humanity gets one more shot." Back on the bridge of the Exodus, Locke addressed the crew, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his chest. "We've been through hell," he said, his gaze sweeping Akka. "We've been through hell," he said, his gaze sweeping across the tired but determined faces of the crew. "But we're still here, and as long as we're here, we're not giving up. We've got one shot at saving everything, and it's not just about survival anymore. It's about ensuring the future of humanity. We will face whatever's coming. Together." The crew nodded, their resolve hardening once again, as if the mere presence of Locke's conviction was enough to reignite their own. The Exodus might have been broken, the fleet might have been scattered, and the galaxy might have been torn apart, but humanity's will had survived. It always would. Locke looked once more at the screen, at the distorted image of Earth, battered and bruised but not yet lost. The universe had been forever changed by their fight, and now they would have to face the unknown consequences of their victory. The rift was still there, the danger still loomed, but so did humanity's unyielding spirit. And that, Locke thought, was enough to give them a fighting chance. The Exodus turned toward the unknown, the crew standing together once more, ready to face the next chapter of humanity's fight for survival. The universe might be broken, but humanity would rise to meet it. They had no choice. The stars beyond the viewport glimmered faintly, distant beacons in the infinite black. The Exodus was no longer a warship, no longer a vessel of pure survival. It had become something more, a symbol of humanity's resilience, of their refusal to be broken no matter the odds. Locke stood alone on the bridge now, the soft hum of the ship's repaired systems the only sound in the vast, quiet expanse. Moreau, as usual, was off overseeing the repairs, the engineers working around the clock to patch the ship back together. The crew was tired, but determined. Even as their bodies rested, their minds were sharp, focused. The rift, still lingering, in the far reaches of space loomed over them. It had been sealed for now, but Kessler's warning still echoed in Locke's mind. Something's coming. He couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the worst of it, that what they had faced in the Voidborn was merely a prelude to something far darker. But for now they had time. Time to regroup. Time to rebuild. Locke turned from the viewport as Hera's calm, measured voice filled the air, breaking the stillness. "Captain, the communications relay has come online," she said. "A new signal. It's from the edge of the galaxy. It's patch." "It's through," Locke interrupted, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of anticipation. His hand hovered over the console, ready to engage, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary message. The screen flickered, and then a face appeared. Not Kessler this time. Someone else. The transmission was faint, distorted, but the figure was unmistakable. An alien. One Locke had never seen before. Tall, angular, with glowing eyes that shimmered with an intelligence far beyond anything human. The alien's voice was deep, resonant, as it spoke in a language Locke didn't recognize. But then, through the distortion, came a clear message, one that sent a chill through his bones. "We've been watching," the voice said. "You've done more than disrupt the Voidborn's plans. You've altered the fabric of the galaxy itself. Now you must face the consequences." Locke's hand froze on the console. He could feel the weight of the alien's words pressing down on him. They had been so focused on surviving, on dealing with the Voidborn, that they hadn't realized just how far-reaching their actions had been. The fabric of the galaxy, something beyond their understanding, had been irrevocably torn. The transmission ended as quickly as it had come, the figure fading from view. Locke stood motionless for a long moment, the weight of the words settling in. The universe had been shattered, and now something else, something unknown, was coming to claim it. "Captain," Moreau's voice broke through the silence coming up behind him. "What just happened?" "We've just attracted the attention of something far worse," Locke replied, his voice low. "And we don't have the luxury of waiting for it to show up on our doorstep." He turned to face her, his eyes hard, filled with a grim resolve. "We've faced the impossible before. Now we face the unknown." Moreau met his gaze, a fire rekindling in her eyes. "Then let's face it together. We've survived the Voidborn. We'll survive whatever's next." Locke nodded slowly, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders, but there was no time for hesitation. The Exodus had only just begun its journey. They had defeated one god, but in doing so, had unknowingly opened the door to others. And now they would have to rise to meet them. "Prepare for immediate departure," Locke commanded, his voice steady but filled with a new sense of purpose. "Set course for the edge of the galaxy." The crew moved swiftly, their actions precise, as they once again took up the mantilla. "It's the beginning of a much larger conflict." Holt met his gaze. "We knew that going in. The question now is what we do about it." "Humanity has shown its teeth," Rhys said. "Now we need to figure out whether we want to keep showing them, or if we want to try and change the game before we're consumed by it." The next few months will determine whether we rise or fall. Holt nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of Reyes's words. The stakes had never been higher. They had won a monumental victory, but the cost of that victory would be felt for generations. The Orca Ari had fallen back, but others would rise. Humanity had just carved out a place for itself in the galaxy, but it would need to keep proving its worth. "What's our first move?" Holt asked, his voice steady. "We rebuild," Reyes answered simply. "We strengthen our position. We prepare for the worst." "And what's the worst?" Holt asked, knowing the answer already. Reyes's gaze hardened, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them all. "The worst is a galaxy-wide war. It's one we may have started, but it's one we'll have to finish." The room fell silent for a moment, as each person processed the enormity of what lay ahead. Then, without another word, Holt turned and walked toward the command center, his team following closely behind. He didn't look back at the shuttle or the military personnel standing behind him watching him. Humanity had forced its way to the table, but now the real test would begin. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their place in a galaxy that had, until now, barely noticed them. As the doors to the command center closed behind them, Holt felt the weight of the universe pressing down on his shoulders, but he also felt something else. A determination, a fire that burned in his chest, refusing to let go. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. As Holt and his team settled into the strategy room, a soft beep from one of the terminals drew everyone's attention. It was a message encrypted from an unknown source. Ilara, who had been working on a communications array, tapped a few commands, decrypting the message with practiced ease. The screen flickered to life, revealing a symbol. It was unlike anything they had seen before. An emblem they didn't recognize, a jagged geometric shape, almost alien in its design. Below it, a single line of text scrolled. "We are watching. Humanity is not alone. The war has only begun." The room went deathly silent. Holt felt a chill creep down his spine. The galaxy was already a dangerous place, but this felt different. This wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. "Who the hell are they?" Kale asked, his voice low. Holt could only stare at the symbol, his mind racing. "I don't know, but we're about to find out." The galaxy had just revealed a small fraction of its vast, dark expanse, and humanity was already at the center of it all.